Now, ordinarily, our company is Edgewords, bottom left there. We do training. We do training on BDD. We do training on automation tools, both functional automation, performance automation. But normally our course is around BDD. We do BDD with Cucumber and Selenium WebDriver. And we do BDD with SpecFlow, so .NET Visual Studio, but again, using Selenium WebDriver. But it is possible, you can swap out any of these tools. I'm just giving you a mix here, different tool stacks, but the tool stack you use is completely up to you. The process is exactly the same. So today we are going to be using Visual Development Studio, SpecFlow, which is our BDD interpreter. I'm going to be using the Ranorex API, and I'm going to be using NUnit as my test framework. So this is just to give you an example, but you could vary the tool stack. It's completely up to you. So quick simplistic overview of how this works. As I say, I don't want to go through all these slides again because you can watch the video back about, quick overview of BDD. But essentially what's happening is we write feature files, and these are just text files. So you can use any text editor, or you can do it directly in Visual Studio like I'm going to do. So we create a text file and we write a feature, and the feature then can contain several scenarios. And you can think of a scenario as a test case if you like. These are written in a language called Gherkin. So Gherkin is just the syntax, the formal keywords that we use to describe our scenarios. So the whole idea of BDD is that it splits it really into the business and technology. So on the business side, if we're doing Agile, on the business side, we are creating user stories. Those user stories are then taken and broken down into feature files, which then are broken down into smaller units called scenarios. And these are all written in this language called Gherkin, but they're all just written in text files. Very simple, as we'll see in a moment. So this is at the business level. Then at the technology level, we need an interpreter. So this could be Cucumber, SpecFlow in this case. And the idea of SpecFlow is SpecFlow will actually read or parse these feature files, and then it will call associated automation code, which might be WebDriver, might be Ranorex, Appium, whatever it may be, which will then automate the system under test and validate whether it does what we expect and create results. So very simplistic overview of what the process, high-level processes going on. Now, as I say, I've just in the GoToMeeting chat, I've just pasted in the link there. So if you want to see the rest of those slides and a bit more about behavior-driven development, there's a YouTube video on there, which is a recording of the webinar that you went on, Emma. I don't know, last month, wasn't it, I think. But
can we put those all in an email to Emma at the end of the session as well, please?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no problem at all. So today, though, we're just going to have a demo of how, because the demo I did was using Selenium, using Selenium WebDriver. So, the purpose of today, Emma, you asked me about, right, can that be done with Ranorex? And the answer is yes, it can. So this is just to show you how that is possible. So the first thing I want to do is talk about Ranorex briefly. So I've got Ranorex open here. Now, one of the powerful things about Ranorex, well, there's several powerful things about using Ranorex Studio, and some of these powerful tools we are going to lose if we go down the BDD route. So this is very important. There's a bit of a trade-off here. If you are going to start doing behavior-driven development with something like Cucumber or SpecFlow, you are effectively creating a framework. And that framework is going to be coded. So the first thing that you kind of lose from not using Ranorex Studio is your record and replay. So one of the great things about Ranorex is I can hit record, I can tell it what application I want to start creating a test against. So here I'm just going to use KeyPass, a little desktop application. I hit record, it starts the application. I can then perform my test steps. So just interact with the application. And when I've finished, I can stop recording and it creates a script for me. So here is my test script. It's captured all the user actions. So what I did, the objects I interacted with, and then when I hit run, it will copy those actions and perform the test. So in Ranorex Studio, you can build automated tests very quickly without programming. You know, we can do record, capture a load of user actions, do some validation, whatever else we need to do to test the application, and it captures all of that, and then we can play it back. As you can see there, that's all happening automatically. So we've got this record and replay facility. Now the other thing, this probably won't make much sense to anyone that hasn't been doing Ranorex, but certainly for yourself, Emma, in Ranorex, every object that we interact with, if you remember, it captures the objects and it puts them into this object repository. So when I'm recording, doing things in the application, it's capturing information about all the objects I interact with, and it stores them in this repository. So this is like a lookup table. It contains information about all the objects in my application under test. Now, the beauty of this is that if anything changed in the application, the object, such as this add entry button here, is only described once. So if the developers change the application and they change this button, all I have to do is update the description of how to identify the object once, and I've fixed all my tests. Now again, if you're going down the route of BDD, object repositories don't exist when we are just using APIs, okay? So these object repositories we see here are just part of Ranorex Studio. Or if we're using another tool like HPUFT, that's got object repositories. But when it comes to coding solutions, and we were literally just writing code, we don't have these object repositories. So as I say, for everyone else, don't worry too much about what I'm saying there, but Emma, because you've been using Ranorex, this is just a word of warning. BDD is great, but you're building a coded framework. So you will lose record and replay, and you will lose things like the object repository.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Okay, so there is a trade-off. Now, in Ranorex Studio, sorry everyone, I've got a bit of a croaky voice this morning. Just have a drink. Right, Ranorex Studio, when we do a record and replay, we have this very easy point and click interface. Drag and drop, you know, it's all very simple. But behind this, if I right click here and say view code, behind this is code. Here is that script that we've just seen, but this is what it looks like in C#. Now this is what we have to code our solution in. Okay, because we're going to lose the record and replay. So if you remember on the advanced course, when you did that, Emma, we started actually, I showed you how you could actually interact with objects without using the object repository, just putting the Ranorex path directly in code.
Yes.
Okay, and that's what we have to do under BDD. Okay, so let's come out of Ranorex and let's just see what this looks like. Just quickly for everybody there, Ranorex Studio is an IDE, you know, that's why they call it Studio, because it's got loads of tools in, and it is actually based on, or it uses Sharp Develop. So there's an open source IDE called Sharp Develop, which people could use instead of Visual Studio for developing .NET applications, and that's what Ranorex uses. So Ranorex Studio and Visual Studio are actually very similar from a lot of perspectives. But what we're going to do now is we're going to leave Ranorex Studio and we're going to move over to Microsoft Development Studio, and we're going to look at the fact that we can use Ranorex within Microsoft Development Studio. And the reason for that is that Ranorex is built on Microsoft.NET. So Ranorex have taken the .NET framework and then they've added their own automation API onto the top of that. So we can actually do all of this without using Ranorex Studio. If we're going to do it programmatically, we can actually do it all within Visual Studio. Okay, so let's come out of Ranorex and let's open up Visual Studio. And you can do this in any of the versions. This is 2015, but if you've got 2017, that's fine. It works in there as well, just the same. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about setup. I've installed and opened Microsoft Visual Studio. I want to start doing BDD in here, Behavior Driven Development, and automating my tests. And I'm going to do that using SpecFlow. So there are other tools available, but for my example, I'm going to use SpecFlow. And there's a free community edition of SpecFlow, which is the one I'm using here. And the first thing you need to do in Visual Studio is if I go on the Tools menu, Tools, and I go to the Extensions and Updates, and I click Online, and in here I search for SpecFlow. Here it is. So the first thing I've done is I've installed this extension. So I've selected that, hit install, and I've installed the SpecFlow extension for Microsoft Visual Studio. Now this then allows me to start creating my feature files, writing my gherkin directly in Visual Studio. So that's the first thing I've done. Then I've created a project. So I've got one as a demo I've already created here. So I created a new project. And then if we go over to the Project Explorer over in the top right, I've actually had to add some references. Okay, so there's a few here. First of all, if I right click on the references and I go to the NuGet packages, okay, so there's some NuGet packages available for what we want. And the first one I needed, if I go to Browse, Search, was SpecFlow. Okay, so here are the SpecFlow libraries that I need to add as references to my project. So I have taken SpecFlow and I've installed, or I've downloaded those packages rather, through NuGet. Now the other thing I'm using is NUnit. So if you remember, I said we want some kind of test framework for our automation. So I'm using NUnit. So I have downloaded the NUnit libraries, and something else here, I have downloaded the console runner. In fact, you can use console runner or console, either of these. The console's got all the extensions in. So in fact, I've downloaded this one, NUnit on console. So just to explain here, NUnit is our test framework, so it allows us to write passes and fails and create some results. NUnit console allows me to actually run my BDD project from the command line. So that's the reason I've taken that, because Emma, you asked me about could we use this with a continuous integration tool like Bamboo, Jenkins, TeamCity, whatever. Yes, you can, because we can compile our project to an executable and it can be run from the command line, and we're going to use NUnit to do that, or NUnit console. Okay, now I'll send you, when I send an email out, I'll send you a list of what you need for this, so it'll give you a quick start on how to get going. Okay, so I've added a couple of references to some external libraries there using the NuGet package manager, NUnit, and SpecFlow. SpecFlow is going to be our BDD interpreter. Now the other thing I need, there's a few other things, is on the automation side, so Ranorex. So going back to our references, if I right click on here and I click add reference, first of all, the Ranorex automation API needs a couple of Microsoft System libraries, and they are system.drawing. So I've added that one in because Ranorex needs that. So system.drawing. And the other one, because you are going to be testing, you said you're going to be testing a desktop application, then we need system.windows.forms as well. And then finally, if I click over on the left-hand side and go to the extensions, because I've got Ranorex installed on this machine, as you've seen, because we've been into Ranorex Studio, if I scroll down on here, here are all the Ranorex libraries. So when you install Ranorex, remember Ranorex is just .NET with some Ranorex automation APIs on top of .NET, and then it's all within an IDE, Sharp Developer IDE, which gives you Ranorex Studio. So all of the Ranorex automation libraries are installed when you installed Ranorex. So here they are. You click on extensions and you can see them all registered here. And the ones that we need are the Ranorex core. In fact, that's all I need for desktop apps. But if you were doing something like the web, then you would probably want to install the Chrome web and also the web add-in here. So these are all the add-ins: Java, Office, Qt, SAP, WinForms. So whatever types of applications you are testing, you would need to just add these libraries. And you could add all these libraries to be safe if you want. But when it comes to just simple WinForms, which I'm doing, you can actually just get away with purely just the Ranorex core. Okay, so if you look at the references, what have we got? We've got the NUnit framework. I've got the Ranorex framework. I've got system.drawing, system.windows.forms, and I've got SpecFlow. So those are my libraries that I need to reference in my project to be able to start doing BDD and automation. Okay, so my project is now set up. The next thing I've done here is literally all I've done is I've right-click, add, and I've added a couple of folders because I want a folder for my feature files, and then I want a folder for my bindings, which are my code, my automation code. So the features are my text files. These are just my feature files. So let's just have a quick look at that. If I right click on this folder now and I say add new item, okay, here's a SpecFlow feature file. So remember, right at the beginning on the tools menu, I've actually added the SpecFlow extension to Visual Studio. So now we've got these templates. I can create feature files. So down at the bottom, I could give that a name. And these are just text files with the extension of .feature. And you can see it gives an example. So here's a feature. This is the feature. And then we've got a description of the feature. And then we've got one scenario to give you an example. Given I've done this, okay, so let's just create our own here. Let's give it a name. Given that I am on the Google website, when I search for Edgewords, then Edgewords appears in the results. Okay, really simple example. We'll get rid of the tag for now. Okay, so we would then just start writing our scenarios, describing the behavior of the system. We expect the system to do this. This is my acceptance criteria, and I might have several scenarios written here. So let's just save that. Now, these are in purple text because at the moment there's no code behind them. They're not associated to any automation. We're just writing text files, and all we're doing, a bit like you would when you're writing user stories, we're just describing the behavior of the system. If I right click on this I can tell it that I want it to generate some step definitions for me because I want to put some automation code behind this. So generate some step definitions. And it says, okay, these are the steps that you've got that currently don't have any definitions, any code bindings. I say, yeah, that's fine. And you can either copy those to the clipboard or you can generate the file for you. So let's generate an automate, a C# class that has these methods in. So click generate, and it says, okay, where do you want to put this? Okay, so let's go into the project. Here's my bindings folder rather. We'll keep the name the same as the feature, and I'll click save. Right, let's have a look at the file that's just created. So if we look over on the right in the Project Explorer, here's the features folder. Here's my feature, my first feature, and here is the class that it's created. And if I open that and we have a look, here it is, here's the binding. So here's our class declaration, and then here are the bindings. So here's my given that I'm on the Google website. When I search for Edgewords, then Edgewords appears in the results. Now anything I put in here, so these are the methods, any code I put in here will be executed as part of that scenario step. So that's all that's happening. We've got, when I run this, so if I right click on this, I can run this SpecFlow scenario. All that's happening is it is looking in the project for any step definitions that match this text. It's looking in the C# classes for something that says that I am on the Google website. Ah, there it is, that I'm on the Google website. It then executes the preceding method. Whatever the method that is, it invokes that method. So that's it from a very simplistic view. So just going back to those slides actually, let's just go back to those slides from that webinar. In fact, we'll use this one. Oh no, that's the other one, never mind. Okay, code bindings, here we go. Right, so we've got these text files where we write our features and scenarios using this Gherkin syntax. So the Gherkin keywords are things like scenario, feature, given, when, then, and. And SpecFlow is our interpreter. So what's happening is SpecFlow, when we run our SpecFlow scenarios, SpecFlow then is parsing those text files, and it says, I'm looking for a step binding that says that I am on the login page. So it's basically just doing a text matching. So it looks through the classes to find a step definition that matches that text, and it goes, here's one, that I'm on the login page. So the method then that follows that step definition, the method binding, is what gets invoked. And that method name can be anything. So long as it immediately precedes the step definition, then it's that method that will be invoked. And that's what these interpreters are doing. So when you're using Cucumber, when you're using SpecFlow, JBehave, all they're doing is like text matching. They're reading through these text files, parsing them, doing text matches, and then invoking methods associated with those step definitions. Does that make sense?
Perfectly.
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so as you've kind of got this big split here, because we've got the business level. At the business level, where if we're doing agile, we're writing user stories. We are then writing our feature files, so we're breaking those user stories down into features. The features are then broken down further into scenarios. Think of scenarios as our test cases, if you like. Okay, and that's all done using English-like language that everyone can understand, everyone can collaborate with. Now what we've just done is we've swapped down to the technology layer, because we have just created an object class and a load of methods, and we then have to complete these methods. We've actually got to write the automation code that does this. So the first one says that I am on the Google website. So in here, I've got to write the automation code using WebDriver, Ranorex, Appium, LeanFT, whatever tool you want to use, that would launch a browser and go to the Google website. Okay, so let me give you a working example. I'll remove those files. Let's just delete those. Okay, so I did a quick example using a desktop application because you said you were doing some desktop testing. So I've used KeyPass, which is what we saw in a moment. So my feature is the fact that if I log in, or yeah, in fact, let's follow it. You can see it here. The feature is new entries. So this is all about creating entries in my KeyPass database. So in order to create entries as a KeyPass user, I want to be able to add, delete, and edit entries. So my first scenario is adding, or it should be adding an entry there, but never mind. So given that I am logged into KeyPass, when I add an entry to the general category, then the entry should be listed in the main table. So I've got my behavior and I've got what I expect. Okay, so the idea is that this is going to log in. Oh, why is that not logging? What I got? No. That's it. It logs in. It's going to click on the general category because it's the next one is when I add an entry to the general category. So here's the general category. It's going to click add entry is the idea. It then creates an entry and then it checks. Then the entry should be listed in the main table. So now we want to check that the entry is there. So that is my my scenario and my scenario steps. So let's close all that now. So I've written this, and then all I've done is what you've already seen. I've right click and I've said I want to generate the step definitions, and it's created my file for me. So if you look over in the bindings, here is my file, new entries feature. So here's my class, and here are the steps. Given that I am logged into KeyPass, when I add an entry to this category, then the entry should be listed in the main table. So here are my three methods and I have to complete the code. Okay, so let's look at the first one. So if I expand out the code, because I've already done this, as you can see. All right, so Emma, you should recognize some of this from the advanced course. Host.local.run application. All I'm doing is invoking KeyPass. So I'm using the Ranorex API now. So this is all Ranorex code. I'm using it to invoke KeyPass. Then what I'm doing is I'm saying I want to create a form, which is a window, and I'm going to call it login form, and here's the Ranorex path to identify it. So I'm saying, right, that's my login form, and then all I'm doing is saying I want to activate the login form, bring it into the foreground, and then I want to find these objects and do things with them. So the first one is actually the password field, and I'm clicking in it and then I'm typing in the password. So again, you should recognize these. We're just using the Ranorex path. We're using click, press keys to type in the keyboard, and then here's the OK button. So all I'm doing is clicking the OK button, and that would achieve my first, if we go back to here. So given that I'm logged in to KeyPass, so all I'm doing is invoking KeyPass. Here it is. Given that I'm logged into KeyPass, here's the method, and all I've done is written the Ranorex code to invoke KeyPass and log in. Now the next one's a little bit more interesting in a way, because there are all sorts, you know, I didn't cover this on that webinar that you sat in on, Emma, because, you know, we do a whole 2-day training course on BDD and writing Gherkin and using it with automation. But there's all sorts of things you can do with the Gherkin language. So as an example here, I've put when I add an entry to the general category, and you can see that general has kind of gone into italics, and that's because I've put some quote marks or apostrophes around it. Now, what SpecFlow does when I do that, it goes, oh, that value might change. So I can change that to anything I want. And what it does is if we go into here, you can see it says when I add an entry to the, and it doesn't say general, we just get this category. And this is a regular expression. Do you remember dot star, same in Ranorex, is a wildcard? So it's basically saying any value, I could use any value there, and the value, if we look at the method below it, this method actually takes in a parameter. So what happens is, this is what's called a capture group, and it means that any value that I put here, so when you use these quote marks, any value that you put in here actually gets passed as a value to the method. Here it's called P0, but you can call that anything you want. It's just a value. So that means then in my Ranorex code, I'm going to the main form and I'm selecting the category here by clicking on it, but I can click on whatever the category name is. So it means I could change the category if I want. And then I'm clicking add entry, and then I am filling in the details. So I'm creating an entry called edge words with a username edge, etc., etc. So I am actually then performing this. I'm adding an entry to the general category, but it could be any category, and I can pass that in as a parameter. You can also use tables. There's a lot you can do with BDD. You can have tables, so you can get it to automatically iterate. You can get it to loop through a table using different data values. There's all sorts of things you can do with Gherkin. It's quite a powerful, flexible language. Okay, and the first one is the last scenario step is then the entry should be listed in the main table. So if I expand this out, then here all I'm doing is trying to find a cell. There's my Ranorex path, trying to find a cell that's got edge words in it, which I do using, again, this was on the advanced course, host.local.try-find-single. So try and find me a cell that's got edge words in. If it's there, then brilliant. And here I'm using NUnit, using an assert. So the assert actually just checks whether this is true or false. So if it is there, if there's a cell with edge words there, it's going to report a pass, else it's going to report a fail, and this is my failure message here. So this is the only thing that's a little bit different. Here I'm combining Ranorex with NUnit. So remember in Ranorex, you'd probably do a Ranorex.report.success or failure, and you can still do that. You can still create your Ranorex report, and you can do it with Ranorex. But here I've swapped over and I'm using NUnit. This assert is an NUnit statement. So I'm just checking that the entry is there. If it's there, it reports a pass. Otherwise, it will report a fail and fail the test. Now, if we go to the top, you can see here are the libraries. So I'm using SpecFlow, I'm using Ranorex, Ranorex Core, System.drawing, and I'm using the NUnit framework. So there are my libraries that I'm using for my automation. Okay, so if I right-click this now, let's go to the feature. And over on the left-hand side, we've got the Test Explorer. So if you click Test, Windows, you can bring up the Test Explorer, and SpecFlow integrates, or NUnit does, with the Test Explorer. So you can see when I build the solution, build solution, here's my add user. So all my scenarios would be here. And you can filter and play around with these scenarios by using tags. So here you can create tags like this is a functional scenario. And then if I go over here, we can actually group by what are called NUnit traits. And, oh no, hold on, I need to build it again. Let's build that again. There we go, category functional. So here are all my functional tests. So the idea of organizing your testing when you're using BDD is by using tags. But as I say, I don't really need to go into that now. It's just showing you, because otherwise, obviously, you'd just have hundreds and hundreds of scenarios. So you actually organize them into categories using tags is the idea. Okay, so let's just build the solution. Let's group that by classes. There's my add user scenario, and I can click run all or run. Select that scenario to run. And there we go, we can see. So what's happening is SpecFlow is parsing that feature file that you can see open, and then it's calling those or invoking those methods, and those methods are using the Ranorex API, so just Ranorex code, using the Ranorex path to identify objects and performing clicks or typing at the keyboard or whatever it needs to do. There we go, and that's just finished. And if we look over on the left-hand side in the Test Explorer, we can see that's passed. So that scenario was successful. Here's the output down at the bottom, so I can click on that. Here are my steps, and you can see each one of these is done and passed, so we haven't got any failures. So we've now executed the feature file. It only contains one scenario, but the scenario is run and it has run successfully.